Welcome to Darkwake Signal. This is the moment when retreat stops being escape and becomes calculation, when slowing down might be the deadliest move. May 1941, Eastern Mediterranean. 4 British light cruisers faced 3 Italian heavy cruisers. Doctrine says one thing. Captain Edward Mallory does another. For the next 2 hours, every knot will matter. Subscribe, hit that like button, and let us know where you're watching from. Signal received. Let's begin. The smoke from the forward funnel was darker than it should have been. Not by much, just enough that an experienced eye would notice. Commander Hugh Lennox stood beside me on the bridge of HMS Calliope, binoculars raised, watching the horizon where the Italian cruisers had first appeared as gray smudges against the afternoon haze. "They're still closing," he said quietly. I didn't lower my glasses. Speed. 18 knots. Steady bearing, decreasing range. Captain Edward Mallory. That's what the duty log would call me. What the Admiralty files listed under Mediterranean Fleet, Light Cruiser Squadron 7. But standing there on that bridge, watching 3 Italian heavy cruisers steam toward my 4 light cruisers with mathematical certainty, I wasn't thinking about names or ranks. I was thinking about tonnage, gun caliber, and the specific geometry of pursuit. The Italians had spotted us 40 minutes ago. We'd been running a standard patrol sweep along the eastern approaches to Malta when their silhouettes resolved out of the heat shimmer. 3 Zara-class heavy cruisers, 8-inch guns, superior armor, higher sustained speed. Everything about them was built to kill ships exactly like mine. "Signal from Arethusa," the communications officer reported. "Captain requests instructions. Arethusa, Penelope, Galatea, and my own Calliope. 4 light cruisers with 6-inch guns and hulls designed for speed and scouting, not slugging matches with capital ships." The mathematics were simple enough. In a stand-up fight, we'd last perhaps 20 minutes before the Italian 8-inch shells started landing where our thinner armor couldn't stop them. "Make to squadron," I said. "Come to course 170. Speed 18 knots. Maintain formation discipline." Lennox turned to look at me. "18 knots, sir?" "18 knots." He understood immediately. We could make 28 knots if we pushed the engines. The Italians could make 32. If we ran at flank speed, they'd run us down in perhaps 6 hours. If we ran at 18 knots, they'd close more slowly, but they'd still close. Either way, we couldn't outrun them. But I wasn't trying to outrun them. The helmsman brought us around to the new course. Through the signal lamps, I watched the other 3 cruisers wheel in perfect synchronization, maintaining their positions relative to Calliope with a precision that only comes from drilling the same maneuvers until they become instinct. "Italians are maintaining pursuit," Lennox observed. "No course change. Range? 22,000 yards. Just outside effective firing distance for their main battery." I lowered the binoculars and walked to the chart table. The Mediterranean stretched across the paper in familiar lines and coordinates. Our position was marked, updated every 15 minutes by the navigation team. The Italian position was estimated, but estimates were good enough when geometry was this straightforward. "They think we're running," I said. Lennox joined me at the table. "Aren't we?" "No. We're leading." The distinction mattered. Running implied panic, disorder, a desperate attempt to create distance. What we were doing was controlled, measured, a deliberate maintenance of specific speed and heading. The Italians were faster, better armed, tactically superior in every conventional sense. But they were also following us, and that meant I controlled one variable they didn't: our destination. "How long until dark?" I asked. The navigation officer checked his tables. 4 hours, 37 minutes, sir." "Too long. Darkness would help, but we needed something else. Something that would make the Italian admiral pause, recalculate, question what his eyes were telling him." "Commence ranging shots," I ordered. "Signal the squadron. All ships will fire 2 salvos at maximum elevation. Straddle pattern. Observe fall of shot but do not adjust for accuracy. Lennox's expression didn't change, but I saw the slight tightening around his eyes. He understood what I was doing, what it would communicate. The order went out. 30 seconds later, Calliope's forward turrets elevated to their maximum angle. The solution was plotted not for hits but for demonstration. We could reach them even if we couldn't hurt them effectively at this range. The guns fired. The recoil shuddered through the deck plates. I watched through the binoculars as the shells arced across the 22,000 yards, falling in tall columns of white water around the lead Italian cruiser. Seconds later, the other ships in my squadron fired their salvos. 48 6-inch shells falling around 3 heavy cruisers, none of them close enough to cause damage, all of them close enough to make a point. We weren't running in panic. We were withdrawing under control, maintaining firing solutions, executing doctrine. Italian response? I asked. No return fire, the gunnery officer reported. They're maintaining course and speed. Exactly as I'd expected. Returning fire would slow them down, force them to maneuver. They had the advantage of position and were content to press it. But more importantly, they just received information that should have made their admiral think. Why would ships that were running away stop to fire ranging shots? Why would fleeing cruisers waste time and ammunition on ineffective fire when their only rational choice was maximum speed toward safety? Signal from the Italian flagship. Communications called out. International code. They're demanding our surrender. No response, I said. Maintain course and speed. The minutes accumulated. 18 knots produced a wake that looked almost leisurely compared to what our engines could deliver. The Italian cruisers closed the distance with their superior speed, but slowly, predictably. I could calculate almost exactly where they'd be in 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. And more importantly, I could calculate where we'd be. The Italian admiral is named Rinaldi, Lennox said quietly, reading from an intelligence summary he'd pulled from the file cabinet. Vittorio Rinaldi. Experienced commander. Cautious reputation. Prefers overwhelming advantage before engagement. Good, I said. Sir? Caution can be useful. It creates predictability. The afternoon dragged on. Every 15 minutes, we fired another set of ranging shots. Not to hit, we couldn't hit effectively at this range, but to maintain the pattern. To reinforce that we were not fleeing in disorder but conducting a measured withdrawal. Each salvo was plotted, fired, observed, and logged. Professional. Controlled. Exactly what you'd expect from ships that knew what they were doing. At 1,640 hours, the Italian cruisers opened fire. Their 8-inch shells had greater range than our 6-inch guns. The first salvo fell 200 yards short of Galatea, throwing up geysers of spray that caught the afternoon light. The second salvo straddled Penelope, close enough that fragments rattled against her hull plating. All ships maintain formation, I ordered. Do not alter course. Do not adjust speed. The temptation to maneuver was overwhelming. Every instinct screamed to turn, to zigzag, to do something other than steam in a straight line while enemy shells walked closer to hitting us. But maneuvering would break the pattern. Would signal that we were reacting instead of executing a plan. A shell landed 50 yards off our starboard beam. The explosion was close enough to feel through the deck, close enough to smell the cordite. Sir, Lennox said carefully, if we maintain this course, they will achieve effective fire within 30 minutes. I know. And at that point, they will begin landing hits. Yes. He waited for more. When I didn't offer it, he returned to his station, but I could feel the tension radiating from him. From the entire bridge crew. They trusted me. 23 years of service had earned me that, but trust has limits when 8-inch shells are falling around you. Another salvo. This one straddled Calliope, close enough that spray washed across the forward deck. Range to target? I asked. 19,000 yards, the gunnery officer reported. Close enough. We were pulling them forward at exactly the rate I'd calculated. Their superior speed, their heavier guns, their tactical advantage, all of it was doing exactly what basic doctrine said it should do. They were closing for the kill, but they were also following. Prepare the squadron for turn-away maneuver, I said. Execute on my command only. Full rudder, new course 195. Maintain speed at 18 knots. Lennox looked up sharply. A turnaway would open the range temporarily, but it would also expose our sterns, the most vulnerable approach for any warship. And at 18 knots, we still couldn't outrun them. Sir. Stand by for my command, Commander. The Italian shells kept falling, each salvo more accurate than the last as their gunnery teams refined their solutions. I watched the fall of shot, calculated the rate of improvement, and waited. At 1,703 hours, a shell struck Penelope. The hit was aft, near the X turret. I saw the flash, saw the smoke billowing from her quarter deck. But she didn't slow, didn't break formation. Her damage control teams would be responding, her guns would keep firing, her captain would maintain station unless the damage was catastrophic. Signal from Penelope, communications reported. Minor damage, no casualties, maintaining formation. Acknowledged. Another hit. This time Arethusa, somewhere forward. Again, no major damage. The Italians were landing shells, but at extreme range, their accuracy was still developing. We had perhaps 10 more minutes before the fire became truly effective. I checked the chart one more time, measured the distances, calculated the angles. Execute turn away, I ordered. All ships, hard starboard, come to course 195. The helmsman threw the wheel over. Calliope heeled into the turn, presenting her stern to the pursuing Italians. The other ships followed, maintaining perfect station even as the geometry shifted. Immediately, the Italian fire became less effective. The angle was worse, the relative motion more complex. We were still pulling away at only 18 knots, still being overtaken, but the rate of closure had decreased slightly. Why are we still at 18 knots? Lennox asked, pitching his voice low enough that only I could hear. Because, Commander, we want them to keep following us. He stared at me. Understanding was starting to dawn in his expression, but he didn't quite have all the pieces yet. In 47 minutes, I continued, we will reach a specific point. At that point, the geometry changes, but only if the Italians are exactly where I need them to be. And the only way to ensure they're in position is to make certain they don't stop following us. By maintaining a speed they can overtake. Yes. And by firing back just enough to seem dangerous. Yes. But not dangerous enough to make them break off. Exactly. Lennox turned back to watch the pursuing Italian cruisers. 3 gray shapes, growing larger, their bow waves bright against the darkening sea. Powerful, confident, certain they were running down inferior vessels that had made the mistake of being caught in the open. Sir, he said quietly, this is either brilliant or suicidal. Often, I replied, those are the same thing. The sun was lower now, painting the sea in shades of copper and gray. The Italian cruisers had closed to 17,000 yards, close enough that I could make out individual details through the binoculars. The arrangement of their secondary batteries, the configuration of their fire control directors, the precise angle of their approach. Ammiraglio Vittorio Rinaldi was aboard the lead ship. According to the intelligence files, he'd commanded destroyer flotillas during the last war, worked his way up through methodical competence rather than brilliant innovation. He followed doctrine, trusted his training, and rarely took unnecessary risks. Which meant he was doing exactly what his training told him to do. Press an advantage against inferior forces, maintain pursuit until within decisive range, then destroy the enemy with overwhelming firepower. The problem was that his doctrine assumed the enemy was trying to escape. Signal from Admiralty, the communications officer called out. Flash traffic highest priority. I crossed to the signals desk. The message was brief, encrypted with current codes, marked most secret. I decoded it mentally as I read. Calliope from Admiralty. Italian heavy units reported your vicinity. Break off engagement. Proceed Malta best speed. Acknowledge. Lennox had come to stand beside me. He'd read it too. They want us to run, he said. They always do. Are we going to acknowledge? I looked at the chronometer. 41 minutes until we reached the position. The Italian cruisers would be in perfect position in 41 minutes. Everything depended on maintaining the current geometry for 41 more minutes. No, I said. We're going to have a wireless malfunction. Noted in the log. Equipment failure, unable to receive or transmit. Estimated repair time, 2 hours. The communications officer hesitated, then nodded. He understood. Orders you couldn't receive couldn't be disobeyed. The Italian guns fired again. This salvo was the most accurate yet. 3 shells landed within 100 yards of Calliope, close enough that fragments pattered against the hull like metal rain. 1 shell struck Galatea amidships, punching through her light armor and detonating inside a crew compartment. Signal from Galatea, communications reported, voice tight. Moderate damage, 7 casualties, maintaining formation. 7 men. 7 men I'd put in harm's way because I was executing a plan that required being shot at. Required maintaining an 18-knot crawl while enemy shells walked closer to killing us all. Acknowledge, I said. All ships maintain current course and speed. Lennox was studying the chart again. I could see him working through the mathematics, tracing our course, projecting forward to where we'd be in 41 minutes. When he found it, his hand stopped moving. That's the position, he said quietly. Yes. That's where the main fleet is supposed to be. If Admiral Cunningham followed the operation plan, yes. Supposed to be? I turned to face him. Commander, what we're doing only works if 2 conditions are met. First, the Italians must follow us to that exact position. Second, the main fleet must actually be there when we arrive. I control the first condition. I do not control the second. And if the main fleet isn't there? Then in 41 minutes, we'll be at the convergence point with 3 Italian heavy cruisers, no support and no escape route. At which point, this becomes a very short engagement with a very predictable outcome. The color drained slightly from Lennox's face. You're gambling our lives on Admiral Cunningham's punctuality. I'm gambling our lives on his professionalism. The operation plan called for the main fleet to be at that position at 1800 hours. It's currently 1719. Cunningham has never missed a scheduled rendezvous in 32 years of service. There's a first time for everything, sir. Yes, I agreed. There is. Another salvo landed. This time Arethusa took a hit near her forward funnel. Smoke began pouring from the damaged structure, thicker and blacker than normal funnel smoke. She maintained speed, maintained formation, but I could see the damage even from 2,000 yards away. Should we increase speed? Lennox asked. Even a few knots might. No. The calculation depends on maintaining exactly 18 knots. Any faster and we reach the rendezvous point before the Italians are in optimal position. Any slower and they'll close too quickly, potentially landing decisive hits before we reach support. This is insane. This is mathematics, Commander. Everything else is just execution. The minutes crawled past. Each one marked by Italian salvos, by shells falling closer, by the steady accumulation of minor damage across the squadron. Penelope took another hit. Galatea reported a fire in her aft magazine that was contained but not extinguished. My own Calliope collected fragment damage along her port side, nothing critical but enough to remind us that we were mortal. At 1738, the Italian fire suddenly ceased. The silence was startling after nearly an hour of constant shelling. I raised the binoculars and studied the enemy cruisers. They were still closing, still maintaining pursuit, but their guns had elevated back to neutral position. Why did they stop? Lennox wondered aloud. I watched the Italian flagship for several seconds before I understood. Rinaldi is thinking. About what? About why we're not doing what we should be doing. I lowered the binoculars. He's commanded ships long enough to recognize when something doesn't fit the pattern. We're not running at maximum speed. We're not maneuvering evasively. We're not doing anything that suggests we're trying to escape. And that's making him wonder why. Will he break off? Not yet. He still has overwhelming advantage. But he's starting to question his assumptions. Which is exactly what I want him to do. The Italian cruisers continued their pursuit, but I noticed they'd reduced speed slightly. Not much, perhaps 2 knots, but enough to suggest caution. Rinaldi was starting to suspect this wasn't what it appeared to be. I checked the chronometer again. 22 minutes. All ships, I ordered. Prepare for emergency turn to starboard on my command. New course will be 045. Speed will increase to 25 knots. Gunnery officers will prepare full broadside solutions. We will be engaging targets at decreasing range. The orders went out. I could feel the tension on the bridge increase. An emergency turn toward the enemy, an increase in speed, preparation for full engagement. None of that made sense if we were trying to escape. But we weren't trying to escape anymore. Lennox had worked it out. You're going to turn into them. In 22 minutes, yes. That will close the range dramatically. Put us well within their effective fire. It will also put them well within our effective fire. And more importantly, it will commit both forces to a specific piece of ocean. They'll have to engage us. They won't have time to disengage before. I didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Lennox knew what I wasn't saying. Before the main fleet arrived. If the main fleet arrived. At 1751, the Italian guns opened fire again. This time the fire was more deliberate, more carefully aimed. Rinaldi had decided that whatever we were doing, he needed to sink us before we did it. The shells came in sustained salvos, each one more accurate than the last. Penelope took a direct hit on her bridge. I saw the flash, saw the structure collapse, saw the ship waver in formation before her backup conning position took control and steadied her back into line. Signal from Penelope, communications reported, voice shaking. Captain killed. Executive officer assuming command. Maintaining station. Another ship. Another good officer dead because I was following a plan that required being shot at for nearly 2 hours. The weight of it settled across my shoulders like physical pressure. 11 minutes, Lennox said quietly. 11 minutes until 1800 hours. 11 minutes until we either found the main fleet waiting at the rendezvous point or discovered we'd led our squadron into a killing zone with no escape. The Italian cruisers were at 14,000 yards now. Close enough that their fire was devastatingly accurate. Close enough that every salvo resulted in hits or near misses. Galatea was burning in 3 places. Arethusa had lost her aft turret. My own ship had taken damage to the superstructure that had killed 6 men and wounded a dozen more. But we maintained formation, maintained speed, maintained the geometry that would put us exactly where we needed to be at exactly 1800 hours. Sir, the gunnery officer called out, request permission to return fire. Full battery. We have excellent solutions. I almost said yes. Almost gave the order that would let us hit back, would let the crew feel like they were fighting instead of just absorbing punishment. But returning fire would slow us down, would disrupt the careful timing that everything depended on. Negative, I said. All ships maintain current orders. I could feel the frustration radiating from the gunnery teams. They had targets. They had solutions. They had the training and equipment to hurt the enemy that was hurting us. And I was telling them to hold fire. But this wasn't about fighting back. It was about being in the right place at the right time. At 1756, I gave the order I'd been planning for 2 hours. All ships, execute emergency turn to starboard. Come to course 045. Increase speed to 25 knots. Gunnery officers, commence firing, full broadsides, continuous fire. The helmsman threw the wheel hard over. Calliope heeled sharply as she came around, turning directly toward the pursuing Italian cruisers. Around me, the other 3 ships executed the same maneuver with the precision of long practice. The geometry shifted dramatically. Instead of running away, we were now charging directly at superior forces. Instead of presenting our vulnerable sterns, we were showing our full broadsides. And instead of holding fire, every gun we had opened up simultaneously. 24 6-inch guns firing as fast as their crews could load them. The noise was tremendous, the recoil making the entire ship shudder with each salvo. Shells streaked across the decreasing range, and I had the satisfaction of seeing at least 3 hits on the lead Italian cruiser within the first minute. But the Italians were firing back with their heavier guns, and at this range their 8-inch shells were punching through our armor with terrible efficiency. Galatea took a hit below the waterline. I saw her list to port, saw her speed drop as flooding compromised her engine rooms. Arethusa lost her forward funnel completely, the structure collapsing across her deck in a tangle of metal and steam. My own ship shuddered as a shell penetrated the aft magazine. For 3 terrible seconds, I thought we were finished. A magazine hit usually meant catastrophic explosion. But the damage control teams had flooded it in time. We survived, but we'd lost half our main battery. The range closed to 10,000 yards. 8,000. 6,000. We were dying. All 4 ships taking punishment that would sink us in minutes. The Italian cruisers were damaged too. I could see fires aboard 2 of them, but they were built to absorb this kind of punishment. We weren't. Lennox was beside me, his face pale but composed. "Sir, if the main fleet doesn't." "For minutes," I interrupted. "We hold for 4 more minutes." But I wasn't sure we had 4 minutes. Galatea was listing badly now, barely making 15 knots. Arethusa had lost another turret. Penelope, despite her dead captain, was still fighting, but she was burning from stem to stern. The Italian cruisers sensed victory. They closed aggressively, their fire intensifying, determined to finish us before. And then I saw them, emerging from the setting sun, exactly where they were supposed to be, exactly when they were supposed to be there. 4 battleships: HMS Warspite, Valiant, Barham, and Malaya. The Mediterranean fleet's heavy units, their 15-inch guns trained on the Italian cruisers that had been so focused on killing us they hadn't been watching their flanks. Admiral Cunningham had made his rendezvous. The first battleship salvo was like the voice of God. 15-inch shells, each one weighing nearly a ton, falling around the Italian cruisers with the kind of devastating accuracy that only battleships could deliver. The lead Italian cruiser, Rinaldi's flagship, took 3 direct hits within 5 seconds. I saw her entire forward section simply disintegrate, saw secondary explosions rippling through her hull. The other 2 Italian cruisers tried to turn away, tried to escape, but they'd followed us too far, had committed too heavily to the pursuit. The battleships had them bracketed, trapped between our crippled squadron and Cunningham's overwhelming firepower. The second Italian cruiser lasted 90 seconds before a 15-inch shell penetrated her magazine. The explosion was visible for miles, a pillar of flame and smoke that climbed into the darkening sky. The third cruiser struck her colors, raised the white flag and stopped engines, her captain recognizing that continuing to fight meant dying for no purpose. "Cease fire," I ordered. "All ships, cease fire." The sudden silence was profound. No more guns. No more shells. Just the sound of burning metal and men trying to save what was left of their ships. Lennox was staring at the battleships, at the Italian cruisers. One sinking, one destroyed, one surrendered. "You planned this," he said. "All of it. From the moment they appeared on the horizon." I plan to be at these coordinates at 1800 hours, I corrected. The Italians chose to follow us here. That was their decision, not mine. You made them follow us. The slow speed, the ranging shots, the controlled withdrawal, all of it was designed to make them think they could catch us. Yes. And if the main fleet hadn't been here? I looked at him. Then we would have died, Commander. But they were here. Because Admiral Cunningham follows operation plans. Because the Royal Navy maintains schedules. Because mathematics works even when applied to human behavior. A signal lamp began flashing from Warspite. The communications officer translated, Admiral Cunningham to Captain Mallory. Well executed. Return to Malta for repairs. I acknowledged the signal. Around me, the bridge crew began the process of damage assessment, of counting the dead, of determining if we could make it to Malta on our own power or if we'd need a tow. Galatea was sinking. We'd get her crew off, but the ship herself was finished. Arethusa might make it back, might not. That would depend on how well her pumps could keep up with the flooding. Penelope would survive, though she'd need months in a shipyard. And Calliope, my own ship, was hurt but functional. We'd make it home. But we'd make it home because we'd been exactly where we needed to be at exactly the right time. And because we'd made sure the Italians were there too. Sir, Lennox said quietly, did you know Admiral Rinaldi survived? I turned to look at the surrendered Italian cruiser. Figures were visible on her deck, officers and crew preparing for captivity. Somewhere among them would be Vittorio Rinaldi, the cautious admiral who'd followed doctrine, who'd pressed his advantage, who'd done everything right according to his training. Everything except question why his enemy wasn't running when they should have been. No, I said, but I'm glad. He deserves to understand what happened here. Deserves to know that we didn't run from him. We led him exactly where we wanted him to go. Will that make it easier for him? No, Commander. It will make it worse. Because he'll spend the rest of his life knowing that his entire tactical advantage was meaningless. That we controlled the engagement from the moment it began. That his ships followed us because we let them. The sun was setting now, turning the smoke-stained sea to bronze and shadow. In the distance, the battleships were maneuvering to take the surrendered Italian cruiser in tow. Closer, Galatea's crew was abandoning ship, their boats pulling away from the listing hull. We'd won. We'd survived. But the cost had been 23 dead, 47 wounded, and 1 ship lost. Men I'd commanded had died so that I could maintain the geometry required to spring the trap. It was still a gamble, Lennox said, echoing his earlier observation. The main fleet might not have been there. Yes, I agreed. It was a gamble. But Commander, everything in war is a gamble. The only question is whether you're gambling on chaos or on mathematics. I chose mathematics. And if you'd been wrong? I looked at him. Then you and I wouldn't be having this conversation. The journey back to Malta took 16 hours. Calliope limped along at 12 knots, her damaged propulsion system unable to deliver more. Arethusa and Penelope flanked us, equally battered, while Warspite and Valiant provided escort. The other 2 battleships had remained behind to manage the prisoners and salvage what could be salvaged from the engagement. Galatea was gone. She'd slipped beneath the surface at 1847 hours, her bow rising briefly before the Mediterranean claimed her. We'd gotten her entire crew off, every man accounted for, transferred to the battleships or to our own ships. But the hull itself, the steel and machinery that had been a living warship that morning, was now descending through 3,000 feet of water to rest on the bottom. I stood on Calliope's bridge through the night, watching the dark sea, thinking about the mathematics that had saved us and the men who died because those mathematics required being shot at for 2 hours. Lieutenant Marcus Hayes had been one of them. Killed instantly when an 8-inch shell penetrated the bridge during the final engagement. He'd been standing 3 feet from where I was standing now, executing fire control solutions, doing his job with the calm professionalism that the Navy demanded. And then he wasn't there anymore, replaced by empty space and blood on the deck plates. 23 men total. I knew all their names. Had reviewed their service records, signed their commendation letters, approved their leave requests. They trusted me to use them wisely, to not waste their lives on pointless gestures. And I'd used them as bait, dangling them in front of Italian guns for 2 hours to maintain the geometry required for the trap. "You should rest, sir," Lennox said, appearing beside me in the pre-dawn darkness. "We'll reach Malta in 8 hours. You'll need to be ready for the debriefing." "I'll rest when we're tied up at the dock." "You haven't slept in 30 hours. "Neither have you, Commander." He acknowledged the point with a slight nod. We stood together in silence, watching the eastern horizon where the first hints of gray were beginning to show. Somewhere ahead of us, Malta was waiting. Reports would need to be filed, decisions would need to be justified, and 23 families would need to be informed that their sons, husbands, and fathers weren't coming home. "The Admiralty signal we ignored," Lennox said quietly. "The one ordering us to break off and return to Malta at best speed. What about it? Our wireless malfunction will be noted in the official log. But everyone will know what really happened. That you deliberately maintained wireless silence to avoid receiving orders you didn't want to follow." "Yes. That's a court-martial offense, sir. Willful disobedience of direct orders during combat operations." I turned to look at him. "Are you planning to testify against me, Commander?" "No, sir. But others might. The communications officer knows the wireless was functioning. The entire bridge crew heard you order the malfunction to be logged. Then I suppose I'll be court-martialed." Lennox was quiet for a moment. "Was it worth it? 23 dead, 1 ship lost, 3 more damaged, your career potentially finished. All to sink 1 Italian cruiser and capture 2 more." It was a fair question. Deserved a fair answer. "The Italian Navy has been operating with near impunity in the central Mediterranean for 8 months, I said. Their heavy units have been interdicting our convoy routes, threatening Malta's supply lines, forcing us to route shipping hundreds of miles out of the way. Today we demonstrated that their heavy cruisers are not invulnerable, that even their most powerful surface units can be trapped and destroyed if they're drawn into the right tactical situation. That will change their operational calculus, make them more cautious, give us more freedom of movement. Strategic justification. Yes. But was it worth 23 lives? I looked at the dark water. Ask me that question in 6 months, Commander. When Malta has been resupplied because Italian cruisers were too cautious to intercept our convoys. When merchant ships full of food and ammunition reach their destinations because the Regia Marina is questioning its tactical doctrine. When men who would have died in those convoys are still alive because we changed the equation today. And if that doesn't happen, if the Italians adapt, if they learn from this, if our success today leads to their success tomorrow, then no. 23 lives for 1 tactical victory will not have been worth it. And I'll deserve whatever the court-martial delivers. The sun rose slowly, painting the damaged squadron in shades of red and gold. Arethusa was trailing a thin streamer of smoke from her damaged forward section. Penelope had a pronounced list to starboard that her pumps couldn't quite correct. And Calliope herself looked like she'd been in a bar fight. Scorch marks along her hull, rail sections bent or missing, her after funnel tilted at an angle that would have been comical if it hadn't represented dead men and close calls. But we were afloat. We were moving. And we'd accomplished what we'd set out to do. At 0823 hours, the wireless operator appeared on the bridge. "Sir, we're receiving traffic from Malta. They're asking for a situation report. Inform Malta that HMS Calliope, Arethusa, and Penelope are proceeding to harbor under escort. HMS Galatea lost with all hands evacuated. Engagement with Italian heavy units resulted in 1 enemy cruiser sunk, 1 destroyed, 1 captured. Estimated arrival Malta 1,400 hours. The operator hesitated. "Sir, they're also asking about the Admiralty signal." the one ordering us to break off engagement. Inform Malta that we experienced wireless difficulties and did not receive that signal until after the engagement concluded. Yes, sir. After he left, Lennox said, "You're not even trying to make it believable." No point. Everyone knows what happened. The only question is whether the results justify the disobedience. And you think they do? I think 23 men died to prove that mathematics works even in war. That careful planning and precise execution can overcome superior force. That the Royal Navy can still outthink its enemies even when it can't outfight them. Yes, Commander. I think they do. Malta appeared on the horizon at 1,320 hours. The fortifications of Valletta rose from the limestone cliffs, and I could see the harbor entrance with its protective breakwaters and the forest of masts that marked the Mediterranean fleet's anchorage. Signal lamps were already flashing from the harbor control tower. Instructions for our approach, assignments for docking positions, notifications that Admiral Cunningham wanted to see me immediately upon arrival. We threaded through the harbor entrance in single file, Warspite leading, followed by Calliope, Penelope, and Arethusa. The damage to all three cruisers was visible even from a distance. Sailors lined the rails of the ships already in harbor, watching as we passed. Word had already spread about the engagement, about the running fight with the Italian cruisers, about the trap that had been sprung. Calliope came alongside the dock at 1,407 hours. The mooring lines went over, the gangway came across, and I saw the reception committee waiting on the quay. Admiral Cunningham himself, flanked by staff officers, all in immaculate dress uniforms that made my smoke-stained, salt-crusted working uniform look even more disreputable. "Commander Lennox," I said, "you have the ship. Begin damage assessment and casualty documentation. I'll be at fleet headquarters." "Yes, sir." "And sir," he hesitated, "good luck." I crossed the gangway to the dock. Admiral Cunningham returned my salute with parade ground precision, his expression giving away nothing. "Captain Mallory," he said, "walk with me." We moved away from the dock, away from the listening ears of staff officers and ratings, toward the old fortifications that overlooked the harbor. Cunningham said nothing until we were alone on the ramparts, looking out over the Mediterranean that stretched blue and infinite to the horizon. "I received an interesting communication from the Admiralty," he said finally. "They're quite concerned that you ignored a direct order to break off engagement and return to Malta." "Yes, sir." "They're also quite pleased that you managed to eliminate 3 Italian heavy cruisers with a force of light cruisers that should have been destroyed within the first hour of engagement." "Yes, sir." Cunningham turned to look at me. "They can't decide whether to court-martial you or promote you, so they've asked me to make the recommendation, which presents me with a problem because I can't decide either." I said nothing. There was nothing to say. "You deliberately ignored orders," Cunningham continued. "Maintained wireless silence to avoid receiving instructions you didn't want to follow. That's insubordination of the most flagrant kind. It undermines the entire chain of command. If every captain decided which orders to follow and which to ignore, we'd have chaos instead of a navy." "Yes, sir." "On the other hand, you executed a nearly perfect tactical deception. Drew a superior enemy force into a trap using yourself as bait. Coordinated a rendezvous with the main fleet that required split-second timing and absolute faith in my ability to follow the operation plan. The results speak for themselves. 3 enemy cruisers eliminated, significant strategic advantage gained, Italian naval doctrine thrown into question." He paused, watching a patrol boat make its way across the harbor. "Tell me, Captain, when did you decide to ignore the Admiralty order?" "Before I received it, sir." Cunningham's eyebrows rose slightly. "You anticipated they would order you to break off?" "It was the logical order to give, sir. Light cruisers encountering heavy cruisers should withdraw at maximum speed. That's doctrine. I knew the Admiralty would order it the moment they learned about the contact." So I made sure we couldn't receive the order until it no longer mattered. And if the main fleet hadn't been at the rendezvous point, then I would have gotten 23 men killed for nothing, sir. Lost 4 ships instead of 1. And deserved whatever consequences followed. You gambled with your ships and your men. Yes, sir. But it was a calculated gamble. Based on mathematics, timing, and knowledge of enemy doctrine. Not desperation or recklessness. Cunningham was quiet for a long moment. The Italian admiral survived. Rinaldi. He's being held with the other prisoners pending exchange. I spoke with him this morning. He's quite bitter about the engagement. I imagine he would be, sir. He said something interesting. Said that he followed every tactical principle correctly. Maintained pursuit, pressed his advantage, executed proper fire control. Did everything his training required. And still lost because, and these were his words, the British captain made me believe I was hunting when I was actually being led. That's an accurate assessment, sir. He also said that if he'd realized what was happening 15 minutes earlier, he would have broken off pursuit. That the only reason he stayed committed was because your withdrawal appeared so controlled, so professional, that he couldn't believe it was anything other than a fighting retreat by inferior forces trying to avoid destruction. Yes, sir. That was the intention. Cunningham turned to face me fully. You used naval doctrine against him. Made him follow his training right into a trap. Naval doctrine exists because it works, sir. Most of the time. But that also makes it predictable. If you understand what the enemy's doctrine requires him to do, you can create situations where following that doctrine leads him exactly where you want him to go. That's dangerous thinking, Captain. It suggests that our own doctrine could be used against us the same way. Yes, sir. It could. And you're comfortable with that? I considered the question carefully. Sir, doctrine is a tool. A valuable tool, essential for coordinating complex operations and ensuring consistent responses to tactical situations. But like any tool, it can be used effectively or ineffectively. The key is understanding when to follow it and when to deviate from it. Today I deviated. Admiral Rinaldi followed it. The results demonstrated which approach was more appropriate for the specific situation. Cunningham smiled, the first real expression I'd seen from him. The Admiralty is not going to like that answer. No, sir. They prefer captains who follow orders without question, who trust that superior officers have better information and make better decisions. Sometimes they do, sir. And sometimes they don't. Yes, sir. He turned back to look at the harbor, at the damaged cruisers tied up alongside the docks, at the work crews already beginning the long process of repairs. 23 men dead, he said quietly. 1 ship lost. 3 more that will be in shipyard for months. That's the price of your tactical innovation. Yes, sir. Was it worth it, Captain? The same question Lennox had asked. The question I'd be asking myself for the rest of my life. Ask me in 6 months, sir. When we know whether the strategic advantage we gain today translates into operational success tomorrow. Cunningham nodded slowly. That's an honest answer. More honest than most officers would give. He straightened, returning to the formal posture of his rank. I'm recommending a letter of reprimand for your failure to maintain proper wireless communications during the engagement. That will go in your permanent record. Yes, sir. I'm also recommending you for the Distinguished Service Order for your conduct during the action. The citation will note your exceptional tactical judgment, courage under fire, and successful execution of a complex deception operation against superior enemy forces. I blinked. Sir? You're being punished and rewarded simultaneously, Captain, because what you did was both wrong and right. Wrong according to regulations and chain of command. Right according to results and tactical innovation. The Navy needs to acknowledge both realities. I understand, sir. I doubt you do. Not fully. But you will. He started to walk back toward the headquarters building, then paused. Captain, if you ever pull a stunt like that again, If you ever deliberately ignore a direct order during combat operations, I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your career commanding harbor tugs in the Hebrides. Are we clear? Crystal clear, sir. Good. You're dismissed. Get some sleep. You look like hell. I returned to Calliope to find Lennox overseeing the damage assessment. He looked up as I crossed the gangway, question evident in his expression. Letter of reprimand, I said. And the DSO. Both. Both. He shook his head slowly. Only you could get court-martialed and decorated for the same action. I wasn't court-martialed. Just reprimanded. Give it time, sir. I'm sure someone in the Admiralty will think of additional charges. I smiled despite everything. Damage report? Extensive but reparable. 8 weeks in shipyard minimum, possibly 10. The propulsion damage is worse than we thought, and the hull integrity is compromised in 3 sections. But she'll sail again. Casualties. His expression sobered. Final count is 23 dead, 47 wounded. 12 of the wounded are serious enough to require medical evacuation to Gibraltar. The rest can be treated here. 23. The number kept echoing in my mind. 23 families. 23 funeral services. 23 letters I'd have to write explaining why their sons or husbands or fathers weren't coming home. The crew wants to know what happens next, Lennox said. Whether we're staying together or being reassigned. We'll stay together. Calliope needs repairs, but she's still our ship. We'll get her fixed, get the crew reinforced with replacements, and return to operations. And the next time we encounter superior forces? We'll follow proper procedure, Commander. Report contact, request instructions, and follow whatever orders the Admiralty provides. Really? I looked at him. Unless the mathematics suggest a better approach. In which case we'll have another unfortunate wireless malfunction. Lennox laughed, a short, sharp bark of surprised amusement. You're incorrigible, sir? No, Commander. I'm a captain in His Majesty's Royal Navy, and my job is to use the resources under my command as effectively as possible to achieve strategic objectives while minimizing casualties. Today we achieve the objective. Tomorrow we'll do the same thing. Whatever it takes. The sun was setting again, painting the Maltese harbor in the same copper and gold tones I'd seen the previous evening. But the context was completely different. Yesterday we'd been fighting for our lives, gambling everything on mathematics and timing. Today we were safe, damaged but intact, tied up at the dock with hot food and medical care and the weight of consequences settling over us. I stood on the bridge one more time, looking out at the Mediterranean. Somewhere out there, Italian naval commanders were revising their tactical assessments. Somewhere, British convoy planners were recalculating routes based on new assumptions about Italian caution. Somewhere, the equations were shifting, the mathematics adjusting to account for what had happened when 4 light cruisers had refused to run from 3 heavy cruisers. Sir, Lennox appeared beside me. The funeral services for the crew have been scheduled for tomorrow morning. Will you be conducting them? All 23. That's going to take several hours. Then it takes several hours, Commander. They died following my orders. The least I can do is speak at their funerals. He nodded, accepting the answer. We stood together as the sun touched the horizon, watching the light change, thinking about the men who wouldn't see another sunset. They followed us because we let them, Lennox said quietly, echoing the words I'd used yesterday. The Italians, They thought they were hunting us, but we were controlling the engagement from the beginning. Yes. That takes a special kind of arrogance, sir. To believe you can predict enemy behavior that precisely. To stake lives on mathematics and timing. It's not arrogance if you're right, Commander. And if you've been wrong? I turned to face him. Then it would have been the worst kind of arrogance. The kind that gets good men killed for no reason. The kind that should result in court-martial and disgrace. I paused, but I wasn't wrong. The mathematics worked. The timing held. And we're alive because I was willing to gamble on precision rather than panic. Next time you might not be so lucky. Luck had nothing to do with it. Everything was calculated: their speed, our speed, the rate of closure, the timing of the rendezvous. The only variable was whether Admiral Cunningham would be where he was supposed to be. And that wasn't luck either. That was professional confidence in a fellow officer. Lennox was quiet for a moment. The crew is calling it the 18-knot miracle. There was no miracle, Commander. Just mathematics. Just understanding that sometimes the way to win isn't to fight harder but to think more clearly. To recognize that running at 18 knots can be more effective than running at 28 if it puts you in the right place at the right time with the right support. The sun slipped below the horizon, leaving the sky blazing with purple and crimson. Night was coming, bringing with it the reality of what we'd done, the cost we'd paid, the lives we'd spent purchasing tactical advantage. 23 men. 1 ship. 3 enemy cruisers destroyed. The mathematics said it was a victory. A clear, unambiguous success by any measure of naval combat. But mathematics couldn't account for Lieutenant Hayes's empty chair at the wardroom table. Couldn't calculate the weight of writing 23 letters to families who'd never see their loved ones again. Couldn't measure the price of using men as bait, even when the bait worked perfectly. They followed us because we let them, I said, repeating Lennox's words. And we let them because the mathematics required it. Because winning sometimes means being willing to be shot at for 2 hours while maintaining exactly 18 knots and trusting that your calculations are correct. And if you have to do it again? I looked at the darkening sea, at the damaged ship beneath my feet, at the harbor full of warships that represented the only thing standing between the Axis and control of the Mediterranean. Then I'll do it again, Commander, because the mathematics will still work. The timing will still matter. And there will still be officers like Admiral Cunningham who follow operation plans and arrive exactly when they're supposed to. The principles don't change just because the cost is high. Even if it means more funerals? Even then. The stars were beginning to appear overhead, pinpoints of light in the gathering darkness. Navigation stars, the same ones that sailors had used for centuries to find their way across trackless oceans. Constant, predictable, reliable. Like mathematics. Like doctrine properly understood and selectively applied. Like officers who could be trusted to be exactly where they were supposed to be at exactly the right time. Get some rest, Commander, I said. Tomorrow we bury our dead and begin repairs. Then we return to operations. The war doesn't stop just because we're damaged. Yes, sir. After he left, I remained on the bridge, watching the night deepen over Malta. Thinking about the engagement, about the decisions made, about the men who trusted me and the men who died because of that trust. They followed us because we let them. It was true of the Italians. But it was also true of my own crew. They'd followed my orders for 2 hours while enemy shells fell around them. Followed them because they trusted I knew what I was doing. That the mathematics would work. That being shot at was part of a larger plan rather than pointless sacrifice. And the mathematics had worked. But mathematics couldn't bring back 23 dead men. Couldn't repair the damage that went deeper than bent metal and hold hulls. Couldn't answer the question that would follow me for the rest of my career. Was I right to gamble with their lives even if the gamble paid off? I didn't know. Might never know. But I knew that tomorrow morning, I'd stand at 23 funerals and speak about duty, honor, and sacrifice. I'd tell their families that their loved ones had died serving their country, executing a successful tactical operation, achieving strategic objectives. All of which was true. But I'd also know, standing there in my dress uniform speaking the words that naval tradition required, that those 23 men had died because I'd been willing to maintain exactly 18 knots while being shot at. Because I'd trusted mathematics more than instinct. Because I'd believed that thinking clearly was more important than fighting hard. And because in the end I'd been proven right. The stars wheeled overhead, constant and predictable. The Mediterranean lapped against Calliope's damaged hull. And somewhere in the darkness, the war continued, indifferent to individual victories or personal costs. Tomorrow we'd bury our dead. Next week we'd complete repairs. Next month we'd return to operations. And if we encountered superior forces again, I'd make the same calculations, run the same mathematics, execute the same kind of precise tactical deception that had worked today. Because it had worked. Because 23 men had died proving that it worked. And because their sacrifice demanded that I keep using the lessons their deaths had taught. They followed us because we let them. And we let them because sometimes the only way to win is to be willing to lose everything while trusting that the mathematics will save you in the end.